breaks down and wonderment begins, Makeshift Stories presents a monthly journey into the improbable.
This month's story, episode 160, Gratuities Not Included, read by Mitchell Tew. Somewhere and sometime, you might inadvertently become the thing you don't want to be. I had never considered my vocation could be labeled as anything other than what it is. I am an actor. I was never lucky or good enough to make it in the mainstream, and no one would call what I currently do high art, or even art at all, and sometimes barely entertainment. However, in order to pursue my passion, I voluntarily indentured myself off-world in the tourist industry, working the cruise liners and the occasional orbital hopper. But after reading the last, admittedly our only review, in the Microgravity Travel Advisor, the words pirates and extortionists was mentioned prominently several times. And yes, indeed, we play space-age buccaneers based on famous historical figures. Unfortunately, I suspect the irate reviewer was not referring to our personas or our act. To ensure I understood the comment correctly, after all, the meaning of words tend to drift over time, and, to be honest, I was hoping for some positive drift here. I looked up pirates and found 3 definitions. 1. A group who robs ships at sea. 2. People who reproduce the work of another for profit without permission. 3. A group who broadcasts media without official authorization. On reflection, to some extent, I could see the reviewer's point. However, we don't, in strict terms, rob anyone. Any money we get is technically a gratuity, so the fit with the first definition I felt was tenuous. Unless you focused on the word extortion, and even that I feel is an exaggeration. Extortion is too harsh a word for what we do. Our artistic director liberally borrows music from old movies. None of us have ever bothered asking her about the licensing, so definition 2 could apply. We do not partake in unlicensed broadcasts from orbit, so 3 is definitely out. However, not a bad idea. I'll mention it to our producer as an opportunity to increase our take. For performers on the low Earth orbit cruise circuit, the take is everything. It's how we survive, how we even have a remote chance of paying off our work bonds. But have a bad quarter or get in with an unpopular act, and a small take might move you dangerously close to the wrong side of an airlock. There's no debtor's court above 250 kilometers, so justice is generally swift and very final. The klaxon sounded unexpectedly. There were no gigs planned for another 32 orbits, roughly 2 solar days, so the business manager must have picked something up last minute. It was close to the end of our 4th quarter, and it was common knowledge the numbers hadn't been good so far. It would be any port in a storm, as the saying goes, and we had been weathering quite the financial squall as of late. I play the role of the notorious early 18th century Caribbean pirate Anne Bonny, part of a trio which included Mary Read and the lead of our little theatrical cabal, Calico Jack Rackman. Then there were the extras who played the cowardly drunks of Rackman's infamous crew, usually antiquated robots, picked up for a song and reprogrammed. In tribute to my historical original, I will on occasion curse the fake male pirate robots for their lack of courage. "Fight like men or die like dogs!" I'll yell enthusiastically. The line, I'm told, is historically accurate, reputed to be said by Anne during the 1720 successful attack on Rackman's sloop by the privateer Jonathan Barnett under the commission of the governor of Jamaica. The records show the only effective resistance was the heroics of Anne Bonny and Mary Read. The men were too drunk and useless. Which goes to prove nothing much has changed in nearly 400 years. Depending on the audience, this helps to loosen the purse strings when the tip bags make the rounds. The standard fee only covers the cost of fuel, and the cruise line insists on a kickback to boot. Our costumes are loosely based. The designers can only do so much with an EVA suit, on historical records from the 18th century. I struggled into mine, leaving the helmet off, and hurried to makeup.
"You're late,"
the stage manager bellowed over the intercom as I rushed down the narrow passageway bumping into the halls in my bulky suit. When had the first call been? Know anything about the gig? I asked Armando, a 10-year veteran of the troupe and our makeup artist. He looked like he had just rolled out of bed. His long, gray-streaked hair, usually immaculately braided, looked like a bird had nested in it. I didn't understand why he was still here. By now, his cut of the take must have been enough to buy out his contract and get a ticket back to the surface. He claimed he was still short, his work bond too large to get out of in a single lifetime. Rumor was he had been involved in some white-collar crime, and the wealthy victims of which now held a large percentage of his bond and would never forgive. Plus, there was the expense of getting his large 108-kilo frame into orbit. The rest of us were just work bonded for the cost of lifting our dead weight to and from the surface. In my case, at 63 kilos, that worked out to 320,000 credits, round trip. At a base rate of 100 credits per show, it would be 3,200 shows to buy off my bond. At 50 shows a year, well, you can appreciate the importance of gratuities, which we euphemistically call the take. Jenna dropped down into the seat next to me, looking worse than Armando. She plays the other female lead, Mary Reed. Maybe this time the take will be big enough for us to buy out, Camila. She smiled sarcastically, through teeth in desperate need of dental work, making me think that maybe our lives and work were becoming one and the same. There's always hoping, she added, and waited while Armando finished my makeup. Where's Rico? I asked. Already in the Revenge doing the pre-launch, Armando noted as he dipped a brush into a pot of dirt-colored foundation. You are the last in makeup. You must have slept through the first call. Air director is panicking, ready to call up your stand-ins and deduct their wages from your cuts. You made it just in time. Armando finished by adding a scar, which ran from the tip of my left eye to my lip just under my nose. To make you look more fearsome for the brats. Nice touch. They're kids? What have you heard about the gig, Armando? A last-minute contract no one else could take. It's a birthday party for some ultra-rich dude's 7-year-old son. Should pay well in tips. A private liner full of 1%ers and their brats. That's a pretty fertile field of work. One that doesn't drop into your lap every day. The producer's counting on this to make the quarter, so you're going to have to work this one hard. There. You're done. Get going or we'll miss the launch window and forfeit the job. The Revenge was docked on the far side of the station in the cheapest berth available. She was a repurposed lunar tug, well past its best before, but still capable of generating the Delta V needed to haul itself and a significant amount of additional tonnage, like a hopper or low-orbital cruise liner, into a lunar injection orbit. With a few decorative additions, the Revenge looked like a steampunk nightmare. It was one of the reasons our show was popular with the retro fantasy crowd. A 7-year-old's birthday was pushing the boundary. We're not normally what would be considered G-rated. As I've said, any port in a financial storm. By the time we arrived, Rico was already pulling away from the docking ring. With the producer yelling at us over the intercom, we literally had to dive from the station into the open airlock. Rico started the burn as soon as our feet had cleared the exterior hatch, tossing both of us against the sidewall like rag dolls, pinned haphazardly to a notice board. I could feel the rumble of the main thrusters through the wall plates. He was burning hard, and the producer was cursing us for being late.
I'm docking both of you. We almost missed our window, and now we'll have to burn extra fuel to make the rendezvous. That's coming out of your cuts.
I struggled under the acceleration to turn my head to face Jenna, and mouthed, I'm getting tired of this. The client, or should I more accurately say, the mark, was a private luxury brand hopper, used to shuttle 1%ers from meeting to meeting or one exclusive enclave to another. They were mostly suborbital, but top-of-the-line models, like the one we were closing on, could reach the hotel zone in low Earth orbit. It was sleek and futuristic looking, in a way like a fin-encumbered 1956 Cadillac DeVille was. I had seen one once in a museum when I was a kid. In stark contrast, the Revenge was a tacky cartoon space galleon. We didn't have yard arms on the solar sails, nor did we exactly have ropes to swing from to board another ship. A rope would have been useless in zero-G anyway. Instead, we had spars mounted to the solar sails with stiff, clear carbon filament tethers attached to their ends and stuffed with LEDs so the thin threads glowed against the black of the vacuum. And it was on the ends of these that we cast members were velcroed, waiting for our cue. With short, precise bursts of the Revenge's attitude thrusters, Rico adroitly maneuvered into position. The luxury hopper seemed to roll over in submission like a dog to please its master as we approached. The viewport slid by, lined with excited kids pointing and yelling against a background of bored and impatient-looking adults, counting the seconds until they could escape to the surface and more important things.
Go, go!
Rico yelled over the radio, and the 7 of us pushed off, swinging on the ends of our tethers like the pirates of old, onto the deck of a hapless ship. 6 landed, magnetic boots clutching the hull hard enough to hear on the inside. The 7th, one of the robotic extras, missed, looking as if it had been hit by some point defense weapon and appeared to spin off into space. An extra effect the client had paid for. Obviously, cost was no object, which was a good sign for us.
Camila, Jenna, ready?
Diego barked on the radio.
Diego, get in character. Stage names only. They can pick up the suit comms.
I yelled into the helmet mic, hoping the hopper crew hadn't already piped our radio frequency into the passenger compartment. Diego was the new lead, the new Captain Jack. He was the 3rd since me and Jenna had started. The lead's percentage was 20 times ours, so they were able to buy out their work bonds or pay to move to a classier act. We had argued with the producer that me and Jenna could play Jack with a bit of makeup and a voice pitch box, better than any of these inept guys they had been recruiting. But he was a bit of a stick in the mud, and anything but progressively minded.
Arg me mateys! We be ready to crack this nest egg and plunder our riches!
Diego yelled on the radio. I could almost hear Jenna groan. Diego's overacting was laughable. But that was our prompt to stomp as loudly as we could across the hull to the airlock, which would be left open for us as negotiated ahead of time. We made sure to pass by the observation ports, scowling and making threatening gestures at the kids. Most were laughing, but there were a few of the younger ones who looked genuinely scared. Jenna attached the thud box to the hull beside the open exterior airlock hatch and triggered it. I could feel it vibrate through my boots. On the inside, the device would sound like an explosion. Through the carbon-reinforced glass, I noticed a 4 or 5-year-old begin to cry and hide his face in his mother's designer, 3/4-length, 100% silk sweater.
She rolls over like a dead whale, mateys. Don't stand there like ye be a dried codfish. Let's be taking her then, eh?
It was Diego again. The line was wrong. He had obviously not bothered to memorize the script. But it was the cue to order the bots into the airlock and clamber in after them. As soon as the outer hatch closed and air burst in to fill the void, we ripped off our helmets. "On 3, mateys!" Diego commanded needlessly. Jenna rolled her eyes, and I punched the inner hatch release, and we tumbled into the hall beyond, all a gimbal like freshly caught crabs squirming on the deck of a fishing trawler. The flight crew did their best to hold back laughter, then put up a mock defense, falling over as well, so we all wrestled in a ball until Jack emerged. "Ahoy there, you lily-livered scum! Ye thinks you can stop old Captain Calico Jack? Show us to the booty, or prepare ye to meet Davy Jones. Anne, Mary, take him!" Diego yelled, laying on the pirate stuff so thick. He was way over the top, probably hoping the producer was on the feed. Obviously, Diego was angling for a bonus. I decided 2 could play at that game. "I gots the scallywag!" I grabbed the neatly dressed purser and winked at her as I pretended to put the woman into an arm bar and placed my rubber knife over her carotid artery. "Which one?" I whispered in her ear. She nodded at a nonplussed-looking privileged brat at the far end of the cabin. Once Jenna had the flight attendants tied up, our motley crew of humans and bots edged into the main passenger cabin. Diego in the lead, brandishing his faux saber. Me second with the purser, knife to her throat, followed by Jenna and the 3 bots, carrying fake canvas money bags, each with a credit scanner sewn into the top flap. Our tip jars. They were programmed to puff up a bit each time one of the marks gave us a tip, and until the bags were fully inflated, the producer would force us to work the room. After all, the show must go on until we all got paid.
Arrgh! We'll be separating ye from your doubloons, you worthless landlubbers. Specially that thar little un. Savvy?
Diego dallied his rubber saber at the client's son. At least this time he had gotten the line right. But out of the corner of one eye, I noticed the adults, whom the bots were shaking down for tips, were not being very generous. By the time our little entourage worked through the cabin to Birthday Brat, the bags wouldn't even be a quarter full.
Boring!
Birthday Brat shouted, checking the flight time remaining on the cabin status screen and yawning.
When are we going to get to Fiji? I want my birthday cake on the beach at sunset,
he demanded. His mother, Jean modded to perfection, turned red with anger and glared at Diego.
I thought we had hired the best rather than a gang of amateurs. Entertain my son or we won't pay.
Diego looked flummoxed. There was a loud thud and the ship suddenly rocked, making everyone, including the brat, gasp. Good going, Rico, I thought. He must have been listening. He had grappled the hapless hopper and fired the Revenge's main thrusters, making the small craft lurch and everyone stumble, which wiped the smug expressions from their privileged faces. Act 2 had started. Newbies, like Diego, weren't normally brought along on a gig with an Act 2 until they had been with the troupe long enough to be trusted. But today, I guess, the producer was desperate enough to risk it.
Quiet! Here's the deal!
Jenna yelled, taking over like the original Mary Read. She had dropped the phony pirate jargon.
I'm Mary, and this is my esteemed historical partner, Anne Bonny. AKA, we're not going to tell you our real names, and yes, we are pretty bad actors. But you've heard the grapples connect and felt the acceleration. That's real. Our colleague on board the Revenge is starting to pull this pretentious excuse for a ship out of low Earth orbit into a lunar insertion trajectory. So, unless you want Birthday Boy over there to wait 6 days until we loop back to Earth, he won't be getting cake anytime soon. Unless those tip bags are filled so tight in the next, Jenna checked her watch, hour that they're ready to burst.
Diego looked as stunned as the rest of the adults. Birthday Brat finally seemed to be enjoying this.
Wow! Real pirates!
He laughed. Some parents laughed too and began to clap. The Marks always mistook the shakedown as part of the act, but for us, it was the whole point of the show.
Here, Captain Jack, make yourself useful.
Jenna ripped a donation bag from one of the bots and tossed it to Diego.
Fill this, and if you can't figure out how, watch the bots. And make sure the autopilot doesn't do anything stupid.
This is my critical role in Act 2, shutting down the autopilot so it won't try to break free of the grapple. Hoppers don't have the thrust necessary to do that, but if the autopilot fought back, it would force the Revenge to use too much fuel, reducing our profit and our cut. Jenna nodded at me, and I thumbed up the aggression level of the bots on the controls integrated into the palm of my right glove. The three machines began to exuberantly thrust their money bags at adults and kids alike. Some laughed and swiped their credit chips over the readers, the bags inflating a bit each time. Offended, others edged away. The bots were programmed to immediately target anyone who was overtly trying to avoid them.
Jack, you useless bum! Get the ones who the bots ignore, Jenna commanded.
The hopper lurched again, accelerating abruptly. Frightened, some of the younger children began to cry. A woman screamed when she found herself cornered by a bot aggressively rattling its money bag under her nose.
You'll give me your doubloons if you don't want your loved one to find you freeze-dried to the yard arms,
it repeated in an endless loop. Our bots, the cheapest ones the producer could find, had a very limited vocabulary. One of the mothers, a nervous-looking dark-haired woman in an expensive leather waistcoat, pulled her handheld out and began to call someone. Jenna was a blur as she swiped the device out of the surprised woman's hand.
I'll be taking that for now. Shan't want to spoil the fun just yet. Savvy?
She had fallen back into character. I assumed to assure our now captive audience that this was still in good fun. She would, of course, forget to return such an expensive premium device. I took advantage of the mayhem to slip away and pull myself up the main hall to the front of the hopper, past oak-lined staterooms and private bars with brass fittings and trim, all top of the line, of course. We should have never been forced into an Act 2 with the wealth displayed here, but sometimes the richer the audience, the tighter they were with the tips. I had to hack the cockpit door. Frequently, the wealthy got careless and left them open, but no such luck this trip, and it was taking longer than I had expected. The autopilot was beginning to attempt course corrections. I could feel the rumble of the hopper's engines through the floor plates.
"Cut the freaking autopilot!"
Rico complained in my earpiece. "Top-of-the-line countermeasures. It's taking longer," I tried to explain. Rico cursed and clicked off. The lock, like the ship's passengers, wasn't making things easy. I steadied my mind and tried different algorithms until the thing finally clicked open. Then I almost fell into the tiny electronics pack space. Behind me, I heard some irate woman start to threaten Jenna.
"I have appointments and meetings. Stop this now and take us back, or I'll make sure you never work again."
An empty threat, as anything above 250 kilometers was international space where terrestrial laws didn't apply. And if never working again included getting our work bonds nullified, well, as I said, it was not a threat at all. I hit the big red panic button on the console, and the hopper's autopilot immediately disengaged. To gather my wits before heading back to the passenger cabin, I sat down on the pilot's stool, and that's when I noticed it. An orange light flashing on a piece of gear, which looked like it had been crudely lashed to the pilot's console, clearly an aftermarket add-on. Curious, I studied its small screen and control surface, which contained decryption, frequency, and recording controls. It appeared to be an illegal receiver. With one of these, you could listen in on voice, data, or anything within 1,000 kilometers. I could only imagine what the brat's father used it for. On a whim, I turned it on and adjusted the frequency to match the troop's comms. The device crackled for a few seconds as it cut through the Revenge's third-rate encryption. Then two voices intruded into the tiny space.
"For once, the credit scanners are showing a good haul, but the owners have been on my back about the margins. They're demanding a big payout this time, or they'll increase our work bonds to get it. So there won't be any cut. But we had a deal,"
Rico protested.
"If I agreed not to send Jenna and Camila at first call so they'd be late, you were going to dock them their part of the take and share it. Now you're telling me I won't get mine either?" "Chill out, Rico. You'll get your usual cut, but no more. Next time, we'll work something out to compensate." "I've recorded this,"
Rico threatened, then cut the connection with the producer. I couldn't believe it. We hadn't missed first call because there hadn't been one. It was just a way to swindle us out of our share of the take. Anger flared, impairing my judgment. I stormed out of the cockpit and was almost back at the passenger compartment when I passed a storage locker and heard sobbing. I stopped and ripped the door open. A young girl cowered inside and screamed when she saw me.
"Please don't space me. I have no money. My mother's one of the flight attendants. She snuck me on board so I could see the Earth from space."
The frightened girl was maybe 8 years old and dressed in five and dime rather than haute couture. "I'm just an actor. We're not real pirates." I tried to reassure, but as if to prove me a liar, a terrified woman swept past, pursued by one of our robots, decked out in pirate garb, tip bag thrust out in front, repeating, "Gratuities are not included, lassie." The dark-haired child looked at me as if I were the devil incarnate and screamed even louder. This was the final straw. I made up my mind and pushed off down the hall. Jenna was still working the passenger cabin hard. "Jenna!" I tried to get her attention. "Is the autopilot off?" She snapped back. "Yes, but we need to talk." She ignored me and yelled over the chaos. "Okay, folks, we're still at the point we can turn around, so you'll be back in time to get to your yoga classes and fancy dinner dates, but those bags aren't quite full yet, and our pilot over there in the Revenge needs to get paid before he'll do anything more." The angry expressions on the Marks' faces told me Act 2 was beginning to wear thin. "Jenna!" I tried again, but she had that look in her eyes which said she was too focused on the promise of a payout to hear anything else. Seeing it was pointless, I made up an excuse to leave. "I'm going to check the cockpit again to make sure the autopilot stays offline." Jenna nodded, and I raced back to the front of the hopper. The steward had found her daughter, both cowered when I approached. "You want a work bond?" I asked. Confused, the woman nodded. "So am I, and I know a way out. Are you and your daughter with me?" She wiped big tears from her daughter's face, looked back toward the 1%ers, held captive by the bots while Jenna continued to threaten them with an unwanted trip around the moon, then agreed. "Come on then, before anyone notices. We're out far enough to make it to the moon." I pushed them into an escape pod located in the hall just behind the cockpit, jumped in behind, slammed the hatch closed, and started the emergency ejection sequence. We were pressed back into our seats as the pod accelerated away. Luna is an independent state made up of people like me who will never be able to afford a ride back down the gravity well. So, although the troop tried to get me back, I had left them on the hook for the balance left on the debt of my ride up. There was no legal way to get at me, and with 1/6 gravity underfoot, I felt better than I had in years. I was standing in the wings at the Shackleton Crater Palace Hotel, watching the last act of an almost decent stage adaptation of Jules Verne's Around the Moon. The house troupe, of which I had recently joined, was sleepwalking through their parts as the wealthy Earther audience worked their way through the hotel's stock of outrageously expensive imported wines. The tourists were talking, laughing, and generally ignoring the actors on stage, and the actors in return were not trying very hard to entertain them. The theater was a dome by itself, connected to the hotel through a single 200-meter-long tunnel. As the last line was being said, the house manager, who was standing beside me, signaled the security guards at the exits to take their break and lock the doors. An unenthusiastic sporadic applause reluctantly dribbled out from the audience when the curtain came down. I picked up my tip box and headed out to the tables as the director walked out onto the stage and took a deep bow. "Thank you, thank you. You've been such a great audience tonight," he lied. "We hope you've enjoyed the show. Now, give a hand for our wonderful interplanetary cast. And just a reminder before you go that we depend on your generosity to bring you such great entertainment. Remember, Shackleton Crater Palace thinks only of your safety in this harsh and rugged place. So, while we wait for security to ensure the connecting tunnel is properly pressurized, please show your appreciation to one of our troop members who are currently around the room. Remember, gratuities are not included." I picked my marks, an older couple studded with expensive-looking jewelry, and began to stalk them. After all, what else could I do? While there are no work bonds on the moon, air is far from being free. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB Financial. To listen to other great APN podcasts, such as Otherwise or The Read Along, please head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Starting or building a business? ATB's Entrepreneur Center is a great place to go. Of course, they can help you with your banking, but they also offer workshops and networking opportunities. They can also help you get set up with a mentor. To check out this and other great cutting-edge services, please head over to atb.com. Makeshift Stories is released once a month between the 15th and the 20th. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell Tew. Opening and closing music was composed and recorded by David Hume. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. You can help us out by writing a review on Stitcher Radio or Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast services. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means that you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.